indeed. But of course, the long-awaited news came on Thursday when the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, laid out his plans to help workers and businesses hit by new coronavirus restrictions, including a job support scheme to replace furlough, help for the self-employed, business loans and VAT cuts. Well, to pick through that for me, tax and employment expert Adrian Huston. Good morning, Adrian.
Good morning, Linda.
Just remind us where we are with the coronavirus support scheme. It's just drawing to a close, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's noticeable that the changes that the Chancellor announced this week are dramatically less generous than the previous ones, and they're also distinctly different, in particular in relation to employees. No longer can, after the 1st of November, no longer can an employee sit at home and receive some furlough money. This new scheme is only of benefit if they're working at least 1/3 of their normal hours.
You're going to have to pick this through for me, this a third. Who pays a third? Who gets a third? And how much will these employees take home in their wage packets?
There is no doubt that this is somewhat complex. If we were to take, as I say, people have to work at least 1/3 of their time, but the example would be easier explained if we pretended that this particular employee is going to be able to work 40% of their normal hours.
Okay.
So they'll get paid their 40%, obviously, from the employer, and then the remaining 60% of their normal pay is split 3 ways. The damage coming from 3 individuals, 3 people, organisations. 1/3 of the remainder, the employee suffers, so they will lose 20%. 1/3 is paid by the government, 20%, and 1/3 is paid by the employer, 20%. So that makes the 100%. So the employee ends up getting 80% of their pay for working 40% of their hours. The problem with this is, of course, that means that for working 40% of their hours, the employer is paying 40 plus 20, they're paying 60% for it. So the employee then is costing them per hour 50% more. And that means in a lot of businesses like hospitality, etc., where we hear rumours of curfews and early closing, those hourly paid people in hospitality, the employers, it's going to cost a lot more for the employer to keep them on because for every hour they are paid, it's going to cost the employer substantially more, maybe 50% more, sometimes a bit more, a bit less, but they become a lot more expensive. So those sorts of jobs, in my view, will not be saved. People on salaried income may well find that their jobs can be saved, or at least until the end of January, because the employers want to keep them on till then to get their £1,000 bonus if the people had previously been furloughed. I do fear for the situation after January.
Well, here's a question from a very annoyed listener. My son, a self-employed musician, was told this week instead of 80% income, he'll only get 20% of his annual income. And then, believe it or not, the 20% will be deducted from his universal credit payment he had to pay for. This means he now has 0 income from universal credit, which he says was designed by a previous regular on your fabulous show. How is this supposed to help? He says the system is set up to punish those who were brave enough to be their own boss.
Quite exact. I mean, this is the thing that people do often fail to recognise, that someone who is self-employed are taking an awful lot more risks in life than someone who's an employee. And when things like what's happened the last 6 months happen, the self-employed have an awful lot to lose. Yeah, he's absolutely right that his self-employment support will be dropping dramatically, and the new scheme from the 1st of November will indeed be 20% of your previous profits. So that is dramatic. I'm not over the issue of interaction with universal credit. I can't comment on that. But the other thing about all of the self-employed relief, the old scheme and this new one, is that it is also taxable. So it's intended as a replacement income, but equally in due course you'll have to put that on a later tax return and pay tax sometime down the line on it. So yes, he's going to suffer substantially from this, and we can only hope that the entertainment and arts sector can be supported and encouraged back into business so that actors and musicians and entertainers can all get back to work, because a lot of them are suffering horrendously at the moment.
You can't be made redundant, am I right in saying, while you're on this new job support scheme?
I don't know. That's not something I've heard, and I haven't seen it so far in the literature from
Well,
the
we'll certainly come back to that because we're going to be talking to Labour Relations Agency next week. I'll put that question to Mark McAllister.
That'll be one
the people
for them.
in the self-employed scheme at the moment, the SICE scheme as they call it, what should they be doing? What do they need to do?
Well, the actual scheme hasn't, the full details of how to claim it aren't out yet, but it'll be something similar to the way they claimed before. First off, they have to check that they were eligible. So they have to have previously been eligible for the older schemes. That doesn't mean they had to claim from them, but if they were eligible for them. So, for example, in the earliest scheme, you didn't have to prove that you'd lost money. In the later scheme, you had to at least certify that you were losing money as a result of COVID. So the people have to be able to satisfy themselves that they were previously eligible for the other scheme, that they're continuing to trade, and that they, after the 1st of November, are affected. So if their business has gone back to normal, and not that many people would say they have, but if their business is back to normal at the 1st of November, they will not be able to claim. Whereas under the previous, particularly the first tranche of the self-employed scheme, they were able to claim simply because they were trading through COVID times. That from 1st November, the business has to be suffering. And their grant will be much lower. It'll be 20% of average monthly profits for the first 3 months, November, December, January. And the government hasn't yet said how much the percentage will be for the second 3 months. So they could reduce that if things are back to normal. Let's pray to God that they are.
And it's sensible that you remind us and our listeners that you will have to pay down the road. That this is maybe an interest-free loan, repayments. There's going to be a
It's not as
moment.
bad as an interest-free loan. It's just it's a grant. You get to keep it, but it's taxable. So ultimately, some tax on that may well be due down the line. But there is at least some further relief for people who pay tax under self-assessment. They're effectively being given until 31st of January 22 to pay any of their self-assessment tax. So that removes this January's headache and puts it on to next January instead.
Adrian, thank you. We always have so many more questions come in after you've explained it so well to us. So if anyone has more questions, we'll come back to them another week because it's complicated. I think that's a good summary, isn't it, Adrian? It's complicated.
It is.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. If you've got a question for our tax expert, do send them in oyb@bbc.co.uk, text 81771. You can indeed, of course, ring right now, 030 30 80 55 55 or text 81771. Really,